will be on professional development and advocacy with Mary Beth Harrington presenting. Alive is very pleased to host this session, a great example of how volunteer engagement fits into the larger nonprofit space and how you can advocate for yourself with senior leadership. This session is 90 minutes long. So if you can't stay past the whole hour and you're a member, you can log into Alive's website and catch the replay later, but we do hope you'll stay for the duration. Next slide, please.
I selected it. There we go.
Here we are. So a brief overview of our agenda for today. We'll deal with some housekeeping notifications quickly. Then we'll do the introductions. Of course, we're all here for the presentation today, and we'll have time for questions and discussions afterwards. So stay tuned at the end of the webinar to learn more about upcoming Alive Academy sessions. If you're having trouble with audio or visual today, you've got some options. You can keep us streaming in video on your computer, but call in from your phone with audio only. If you are having trouble with your bandwidth, sometimes calling in by phone will help. Put any other tech support questions you might have in the chat box to presenters only, and Gretchen will help sort you out. Speaking of the chat box, if you want to talk to all attendees, make sure you choose that function first. Otherwise, you're just talking to Gretchen and myself, and we want to encourage you to chat with each other and share your experience. We will be monitoring questions in the chat box and Q&A as we go along. And now I am pleased to introduce Mary Beth Harrington. For 30 plus years, Mary Beth Harrington has been one of the nonprofit sector's most passionate supporters. Her career path is unique. Rather than focusing on a particular sector, she has worked with a variety of nonprofits, from AIDS organizations to zoos. Harrington currently travels the country, speaking at conferences and to individual organizations, articulating issues facing our nonprofit community, urging nonprofits to welcome new leadership, collaborate to be more effective, develop their boards to be more sustainable, and recognize the value of their volunteer program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth, and we'll get started with the presentation.
Kathy. So I have a little bit about, oh, that kind of came up. I didn't expect that. I think, oh, I see what I did. I apologize. I had I had the wrong slides. Let me go back. That's not what I want to do. I apologize, folks. Okay, let me go back to and find the correct slides. We thought we had them all set up. Files. Okay. May try something else.
Alana says, it's okay, Mary Beth. This is the world we're living in.
Thank you, Alana. I very much appreciate that, because you can imagine my heart beating profusely right now, because I thought I had everything all set up, of course. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to hit the slideshow, and my challenge right now is, can you see the presentation? Probably not.
Not yet.
Okay, I know what's going on. So let me end show. Let me go to this. I might have to get my tech person over to me. Can you come over and help me out, please? This is why I had somebody hang on. The presentation is currently not showing up because it's not showing up.
Okay. Just a moment, folks. This is the one.
That's the correct one.
Okay.
But I don't see it on the options for sharing. Share my screen and then go to, will it show up automatically?
That's what I'm hoping.
So go over to share.
See if that works.
Okay. Okay, guys, how's that?
I can see it. We're still on the first alive page, right?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, because I checked and it should go on. I apologize, guys. Anyway, that's what happens. So here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Ted, for being around here. I thought it was just superfluous for him to be here, but obviously it wasn't. Thank you. Anyway, so everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for being here. A couple of things. We have made every attempt to make this as interactive as possible. However, I really believe in content, and I believe that's what you're coming here for. So if you will work with me, there's ways that we can make this more interactive while not losing on any of the content. The first thing is in the chat feature, just making sure that you know how to use the chat feature. Please go ahead and put your name, the title of your title, your organization, where you're calling from, your email address, and one thing you may want to learn from this session. If you will go ahead and do that. And just so you know, some of you may not know this, I'll show you in a second that you can actually save the chat. And I like to do that whenever I'm participating in one of these sessions, because especially if you have everybody's name, organization, if there's some reason I want to follow up with somebody afterwards, then I have their information, which is really nice. Also knowing where everybody's from, especially if you find out that somebody's calling in from somewhere close to you and you've never met them before, that gives you an opportunity. So I will show that in a second. We do try to begin on time. We promise we will end on time. You are encouraged to participate, but we try to keep it to one voice at a time. As Kathy said, we will have questions and answers. And regarding the slide deck, if you are a member of Alive, you will get a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck. And one thing I want you to know about the slide deck, there are a lot more slides included in the full presentation that I'm going to show you today, because I believe that there's a lot of information that you may want, but you don't want to sit here for 3 hours going over all of it. So what I have done is I've hidden probably about half the slides in some cases with enough information for you to get the gist of what I'm talking about in that slide and get the specific content and information. If for some reason you're looking at the slide deck and there's something that I did not go over in the presentation that you have a question about that you didn't understand, please, 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 my information is throughout this presentation. You're welcome to contact me by, via email and say, hey, Mary Beth, on slide number 25, you mentioned this. What did you mean by that? And I'd be happy to answer questions. I do that all the time. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have about anything that I've covered today. And regarding save the chat, in your chat feature, down at the bottom, on the right side, you'll see it'll probably say Gretchen's name or Kathy's name or something. And then there'll be 3 dots. If you click on those 3 dots at the end of the presentation, there should be an option that says save chat, and that will give you the opportunity. Now, when you save chat, it's going to be just all the content, and it'll be, if you are old enough to remember computers at the very beginning when we did the DOS, when it was just copy and copy, that's what it's going to look like. So it won't look, the information will be there. It just maybe won't be as pleasant to read as some other information. Okay, moving along. It says remain on camera. We're not doing that today, but please be ready to be on mic. What we're going to be doing is, again, at the very bottom, you'll see that there should be something on the bottom of your computer that says raise hand or reactions or something like that. So if you have any comments and you want to be taken off of mute, please go ahead and raise your hand whenever you have a comment about something. Or if you have a question, you can also utilize the chat. We have Kathy and Gretchen here monitoring the chat and keeping track of everything so that we know what's going on. Okay. All right. Getting to the presentation. So today we're going to be talking about appreciating volunteer management as a step on your career ladder. Now, and let me get to the agenda for today. So reframing your management experience. So you want to be an executive director? Maybe, maybe not. What does your board do anyway? We're going to be talking about a little bit of caution about culture of your organization. Then really quick, what have we learned? A summary of today, and also some resources that you may want to look at. Now, full disclosure, I was a volunteer manager, and I was able to get a job as an executive director after that period. My experiences may be different than yours. Everybody's experiences are going to be different. And I can't tell you exactly, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to say, and then you're going to get to be an executive director or something like that. I mean, I have my magic wand here. I made sure I brought it, but it doesn't always work perfectly. So the thing is to keep in mind is that throughout the session, I'm going to give you some tips, some tricks, some suggestions, some things to consider. But it's going to be up to you to decide how you utilize this information, which is why the session is very interactive, because I want to hear your comments. I want you to hear your thoughts. I want to hear what you think you should do or how you can add. The other thing I want to make sure that I say is that I know Kathy after session is going to be talking about the LinkedIn program. Somebody made a comment about this presentation ahead of time that said, but I want to stay a volunteer manager. That's fantastic. That's great. I'm so delighted that you love your job and you like what you're doing. But chances are you may want a salary increase at some point in time. Chances are you may want a promotion, a different title, or you might want an assistant or something like that. So all of the information that we're providing today could be used if you just want to, raise your profile within your organization. So it's not just for if you want to be executive director. I developed it for that purpose because that seems to be what a lot of people want to do. And I can tell you, as somebody who has been a volunteer manager, that many of the skill sets and the things I did as volunteer management just were very similar to what I did as an executive director, a little bit different, but they're very similar. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'm not used to the time delay for the presentation. All right, let's talk about reframing your management experience. Okay, one thing we're going to be doing today, and this is up to you whether you want to do this or not. I have developed some coursework. So during today's session, I'm sure you're going to be paying very close attention, taking very good notes of everything I'm talking about. But I also want you to do some work during the session. I want you to write 1 to 3 sentences, 1, 2, or 3 or something sentences that describe your work. Describe what you do without using the term volunteer. A lot of times in volunteer management, we'll say we supervise volunteers or we manage volunteers or something like that. I don't want you to use the term volunteer. Okay, so I want you to work on this. And during the session, there may be things that I say, suggestions or something like that. So you may be editing it throughout the session. That's perfectly fine. And then at the end, I'm going to call on you guys, and hopefully some of you will volunteer to tell us what you wrote. All right, is that fine? Again, feel free to rewrite and edit throughout the session. And then again, at the end, be ready to share, at least hopefully some of you will share what you have written. Okay. So in terms of the first thing you need to do is, like I said, know thyself and promote thyself. So the very first thing you need to do on this journey is identify what are your strengths. For instance, one of the things that a lot of times volunteer managers are really good at doing is identifying talent. You may not have thought of it like that, but that's a really good key word to use when you're trying to promote yourself as something different than a volunteer manager. I really am very good at identifying talent and identifying skills and placing individuals in the right position for success. Ensuring individuals have what they need to succeed. That's really the job of an executive director, is making sure that everybody has the resources that they need to succeed. So for those of you, you can use the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, what other possible strengths that you as a volunteer manager may have that you could use to grow into or move into another position? So you may want to chat or suggest something. Lori, I see, says, I'm actually monitoring the chat, says relationship building, excellent. Able to work with a variety of people, capacity building. These are great, connecting people, collaborating. I'm not able to, strategic planning, detail oriented. I'm not able to say everything that, say everything that everybody's saying, but these are fantastic. Training people, staying in budget. Excellent. Again, I hope that you will save the chat afterwards so that you will have all these words and all these strengths that then you can use and identify which ones are appropriate for you. Some of these you may say conflict resolution. Well, I don't know anything about that. That's okay. And that's the other thing that's really important to understand is going into an executive director position, you do not have to know everything, right? You don't have to know everything, but you need to know what you do know, and you need to know what you don't know. And so hopefully, therefore, you can find people who can fill in the gaps for you. Some of you may, especially those of you who might be in the Buffalo area or the Kansas City area, different things like that, may be really thinking about football these days. And I certainly am. And there's two types of football coaches or coaches that I admire. The first one is sometimes there's a coach who has a system, who has a scheme, and then they either get the players they have to conform to that scheme, or they'll go out and find players who fit that scheme. And that's one way of coaching. But there's another type of coaching that I actually admire even more, is the coach that takes the players, sees who he has, and then conforms the scheme to fit in with the player's talents and what their skill sets are. And so as an executive director, that's a really good thing to do. And as a volunteer manager too, it's probably something that you do, where you basically figure out that I have these people who are really good at this, doing this, and then I'm going to put them in the best place possible to succeed. Excellent. Thank you for jumping in on that. We appreciate it. So I have two job descriptions here, and I just want you to kind of see what they say. So this is the first job description. It says the executive director is responsible for overseeing the administration, programs, and strategic plan of the organization. Kind of a generic title. And their duties include fundraising, marketing, community outreach, and reports to board of directors. Okay. So obviously this is not the full job description. This is just the first comments about it. And you can see that with just a little bit of maneuvering and changing, you can change this. So the volunteer manager is responsible for or overseeing the administration, programs, and strategic plan of the volunteers' experience within the organization. And other key duties, including fundraising. I didn't change that much at all. Okay, you're not directly reporting to the board of directors, but when you think about it in terms of volunteer management, and some of you said this in the chat, some of you, fundraising is a part of what you do. And if it is not, in your opinion, a part of your job duties, think about that a little bit more. Really? You really have nothing to do with fundraising? And that may be the case. I'm not trying to say it is, but I really want you to stretch and really start thinking, I really do fundraising because I'm going out and I'm recruiting volunteers to work the special event, which is a fundraiser, or I've written grants before, Or somebody said friend raising. Yeah, when I teach board development, we talk a lot about friend raising, but absolutely. So being able to, I'm not saying to lie, and I'm not trying to say deceive anyone, but try to make sure that, is there not any way you're part of fundraising? Aren't you marketing? Of course you're doing community outreach. So being able to, sorry, this is a PR word, but spin the information to better articulate what you're doing in terms of going for another position like executive director or something like that. Okay. And just again, like I said, you do not have to be necessarily good at everything. The other thing is look at all these buzzwords and how many of these could you use if you were talking about what you do. Somebody's talked about strategic. Oh, I love how somebody said brand ambassadors. Excellent. These buzzwords are fantastic. And, if this is not a word that you've thought of before, then maybe think about how you can use that in your job description. I love the word dynamic, or showing initiative, or being tenacious, having experience in marketing, community outreach, budgeting, just thinking about all the different things that you do as a volunteer manager that you would do if you were an executive director or vice president or some other position within the organization. And you want to utilize these words in your cover letters if you are applying for a job, as well as in your resume, obviously. But also, if you are redoing your job description, your current job description, think about how many of these words you could use in your current job description. Again, like I said, some of you may love the job you're in, but you just want a little bit more prestige or a higher profile within the organization. And utilizing these words will really help in that endeavor. So let's pretend you want to be an executive director. And what I've done is I have pulled just a generic job description for an executive director off the internet. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over this, and if you can go off mute and respond with how you think you are accomplishing these duties as a volunteer manager right now, that's great. I can also follow it in the chat as well. So for instance, the first thing is responsible for planning, organization, and direction of the organization's operations and programs. How are you doing that right now in your position as a volunteer manager? Does anybody have any ideas? Not be exactly word for word, but are you doing that? Please put that in the chat. Yeah. Finding out what the needs are in each department and recruiting for those needs. Thank you, Joanne. Excellent. Excellent. That's what I'm talking about. Just, taking, if you were to sit here and you're saying, okay, I want this position, here's the job description. All right, now taking and breaking down everything that they say is in the job description and identifying what you are currently doing right now that would be applicable to that position. Okay. And this is just practice. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it doesn't. Somebody says leading the direction of the program based on industry forecasts. I love it. Those are like 25-cent words. Excellent. Excellent. All right. The next one is develop and implement consistent inventory and cost accounting policies, procedures, and operational reporting and metrics. What are you doing right now that somehow articulates those items listed in this job description? Somebody says sharing best practices with managers along with ideas of how volunteers can help make them possible. Good. I work in hospice. I identify patient needs and match the appropriate volunteer to that patient to match their needs. Excellent. And notice how they talk about operational reporting and metrics. You're doing that right now, I bet, when you're trying to report on your volunteer management and your volunteer number of hours and different things like that. Data, somebody just talked about data analysis, right? So those are some things you're probably doing right now, and you probably didn't think about utilizing them as an executive director. So one of the things I found that was very positive when I was applying for the position is just basically showing that I had some experience doing the types of things that they wanted me to do as an executive director. Again, you're not going to have everything. You're not, when people write out these job descriptions, they want everything and the kitchen sink, so the idea is to just be able to articulate, I have some experience in some of these areas. Excellent. The next thing is says oversees and reports on the organization's results for the board of directors. Okay, you may not be directly providing that information to the board of directors, or maybe you are, because I know some of you do provide reports to your executive director, who then reports to the board of directors. So that's something. Number of clients served by volunteers, exactly, being able to provide that information. We have a couple more slides here. So the next thing on the job description is prepare accurate and timely analysis. Analysis is a really good buzzword. It's something you should be able to identify in your resume and cover letter. So timely analysis is that capture and communicate fundraising results, variances, and performance trends. What are you doing right now that articulates or touches on some of that? Meeting performance measures. Excellent. Carol said that. Anything else? Remember, fundraising. Fundraising is a huge part of being an executive director. Even though the executive director may not totally be responsible for every aspect of it, you might have a donor development person or somebody else who actually does all that. You need to be able to articulate that you have some experience in fundraising. So that's something you want to really think about a little bit. If that's not an element that's in your portfolio right now, if that's not something you've been doing, that may be something that you want to volunteer to do for another organization, if that's not something that you have to do for your organization. So basically it's a weakness. Yeah, it's hard. Keeping in mind that if you've been writing grants, that's part of fundraising process too. So just looking at it, like I said, reframing it a little bit. Remind all volunteers of dollars for doers or donor match. Excellent. Next one is provide leadership to and manages the efforts of site staff to ensure appropriate support of all departments. How would you explain what you're doing right now and how that meets that, that description? We manage an unpaid workforce, right? That's one of the best things that you can articulate, is helping people. In fact, I can probably assure you that most of you probably manage more, quote, staff than everybody else, right? I mean, if you take the number of volunteers you have, that's probably double, triple, even quadruple the number of actual staff people you have employed at your organization. So keeping that in mind and helping to reframe that to other people so that they see that. Developing volunteers to support various departments. Absolutely. The next thing is supervising the development of operations-based financial modeling. This one was kind of tricky. Supervise the development of operations-based financial modeling. Cost savings report. Yes, yes. Yes, perfect. So that's fantastic. Excellent, Alana. And then another one, ensures that services and funding relationships are robust enough to meet or exceed strategic goals and objectives. Somebody said stay in budget. Yeah. Use the independent sector to show the value of the volunteers, right? Excellent. All right, let's move on to the next one. You guys are doing a fantastic job. Sometimes when you see these job descriptions, I know when you first look at them, you're like, I don't do that. But breaking down the words and thinking about it a little bit differently is a great way of being able to better articulate what you do and the impact you're making on your organization. coordinate and lead annual budget reviews, monthly, quarterly reviews, periodic forecasts. Forecast is a great word to be able to utilize somehow. Updates with operational and senior manager for all locations. You're probably doing that right now. We have a week, Michelle says we have a weekly collaboration of care meetings with the interdisciplinary group of every week for all of our patients. Excellent. The next one is approved major systems implementations related to cost and inventory control. I don't know what this job description was for. I just pulled it off the internet, but project management. Yeah, Renee, excellent. Excellent. And then the last one is retain a diverse and highly qualified staff and volunteers. See, volunteers is in there by providing career coaching, growth, and personal development for our workers. I think that's something all of us could probably just take right now and just add to our job description right now. Just taking out the word maybe staff and putting volunteers. Yeah, Joanna, we do that every day. Exactly. Exactly. So a little bit more about the executive director qualifications. These are some of the things that the job posting said that they were looking for somebody who was flexible, organized. Carol says, and get gray hairs every day doing it. Yeah. Takes initiative. So a lot of the buzzwords that we saw earlier, they're in this, but you notice that these are some of the things. Enthusiastic. So probably most of you, if you're looking at this list, you're like, check, 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 ability to multitask. Sure. Check, check. Right. And this is an executive director position. Joanna says, this is us. Yes. Yes. And Renee, thank you for saying these are CVA competencies. Exactly. So, you know, right now I could just change it and say volunteer manager qualifications and skills, right? The last part of this executive director job posting, I want to make sure that we talk about. So this is some of the experience that it indicated. So bachelor's degree. Now write it out right now. Some of you are getting very maybe disappointed because you're like, degree in finance, accounting, or management. But notice it says preferred. Preferred is your get out of jail free card. I love seeing preferred because preferred means we'd like it, but we're not going to hold you to it. So, so right now I would say, hey, I have a bachelor's degree in management or something like that. So one of the things to keep in mind is if it says you have to have it, then you have to have it. That is something that they require, a requirement. But if it just says preferred, like a lot of times you might see something where it says, you know, Spanish preferred. Well, that means that they would love to have somebody who is fluent in Spanish, but it's not, you know, they understand there may not get, there's some other things that they're looking for. I conduct and I work with the organizations to conduct executive searches. And trust me, when we develop the job description, the job posting, we are thinking about everything we could possibly need, but we also start to identify and make a list of what the priorities are. Well, we have to have somebody who has this experience and we have to have somebody who has that experience or something like that. It says 10 or more years of nonprofit management experience in an operational environment. Some of you that would work for you right now. Some of you may need a few more years. And it says 5 or more years management or supervisory experience. Again, some of you can check that off right now. The trick is that you have to make sure that people understand when you're talking about it, that it, you know, you're working with volunteers. Somebody said, Carol says, my current position said required. I applied anyway. They waived the degree based on my experience and my CVA. See, there you go. Fantastic, Carol. Thanks for sharing. So a lot of times organizations, what they say they want is not necessarily what they will, you know, they'll accept more than that. Now, some of you may say, well, you know, I need a little bit more experience. And so what I've done is I've pulled up a list of everything that I've developed a couple of nonprofit management certificate programs, and I want to show you some of the things that are covered in these. One thing I want to make sure that you understand that I had to learn is that a nonprofit management or a certificate program, if you see the word certificate, that's not necessarily has to be aligned with an educational institution. So a certificate is not the same as a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or something like that. But in our industry, it's still well thought of, and it shows that you have had some education and garnered knowledge in different areas. Okay. So I want to make sure you understand that, because I didn't know that when I first started out working on these certificate programs. So some of the things that you may see in a certificate program, and the ones in green are the ones that are more common, is a lot of times there'll be a session on nonprofit role in society, so people can understand what the nonprofit is and how it all works. It says ethical leadership, strategic communications, and marketing. These are also the ones that are in green, are the ones that I really want to make sure that if you're looking for a certificate program, you find a program that specifically includes these areas, because these areas are most conducive to, you know, showing knowledge and getting knowledge for an executive director position. Creating anti-burnout culture was something that we had included in our session, but a lot of sessions don't have that. Financial management, that's probably an area where most of us, I will say, especially myself, need a lot of help. You know, that's an area that I don't know a lot about. And so again, a good nonprofit management certificate course, or even some places are offering specifically nonprofit financial management certificates. If you could get something like that, you could include that on your resume. And yes, all these certificates that you earn are things that you could include on your resume. So if somebody says, do you have experience in financial management, and you've taken a certificate course, you can say, yes, I've done that, or at least I've had some education on it. Some other things to think about: grant writing. That's always a huge thing that a lot of times certificate courses will have. And of course, you could take an entire certificate course on grant writing. That's something that could be possible too. If you do not have any experience in doing grant writing and are not currently grant writing, that may be something that you want to consider including or getting some more experience about. Of course, volunteer management should be included on any nonprofit management certificate, of which all of you would excel at. Advocacy, it's a civic advocacy. So advocacy, I want to just articulate a little bit, because there's a lot of confusion about advocacy. Advocacy comes in two forms. First of all, there's advocating that is going to the legislature, advocating for the nonprofit sector or for specific bill or something like that in your state or national sector. But advocating is also going out and doing community outreach and making sure that the community is aware of your organization and its mission and what you do to support the community. So making sure that you might not have a lot of legislative advocacy experience, but I guarantee all of you have community advocacy experience. And so just being able to articulate about both kinds of advocacy. Of course, risk management for nonprofit organizations is really a great thing. You can always, I suggest, if you don't have a lot of experience with this, you contact the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. It's nonprofitrisk.org. And I think those resources are actually at the end of the presentation. Somebody to good follow up with some of this. Then also how, this was always fun, how art makes you a better communicator. This was specifically for an art serving organization, but being able to communicate is really fantastic. Of course, public speaking training, which you already do. You probably do have some experience public speaking. It may not be your favorite thing to do, but those are things that you want to make sure that you have some experience doing so that you can include them on a potential resume, job description, etc. And of course, nonprofit governance, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here. And then some of the other things that we included in this certificate program was time management, multitasking, building and leading teams. That's something that a lot of times is not in every single nonprofit management certificate program that I have seen, but it's something that I think would be very, very good to include. Difficult conversations and things like that. Those are really good things. Amy, have any other ideas, other things that you've seen in nonprofit management, or things that you think would be really good to learn or have knowledge of when applying for an executive director position? I see grant writing, somebody's writing accessibility. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Alana, for suggesting that. More and more project management, right? Project management is actually articulated in a lot of things in this certificate, but it wasn't spelled out. And obviously all of you have a lot of experience doing project management. So keep that in mind and keep that, maybe paste the word above your computer so that you can remember to use that. Collaboration and networking. Absolutely. Those are fantastic. Good words, good things to think about. You guys are getting it. This is fantastic. Okay. So one of the things, oh, and I had some jobs. Oh, this is a great book, Goodreads. Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for suggesting that. One final thing about job search. I have helped a lot of people do job searches and look for jobs and get jobs. And a couple things, you guys, I'm sure already know this, but at the last minute, I added this because I want to make sure, just in case, everybody knows about this. First of all, networking works. Networking is really important. I know that the last 3 jobs that I have had were never, ever posted. Nobody ever posted them. They were just, somebody knew that I was looking for a job, or somebody thought I might be really, really good for a position or something like that. And so that's how that works. It's not always perfect, but that's a lot of times how this works. So you want to make sure that you're working and you're doing networking, and not just in volunteer management, sector. It's really great for us to be able to talk to each other and visit with each other, but making sure that you also are networking with businesses, with the business community, as well as with other nonprofits and nonprofit management, other nonprofits. In terms of if there is a job that you really, really want, couple things I've told my kids, I've told everybody that I've worked with, take the job description or the job posting and use some of the actual words that are in that job posting or job description for your cover letter and your resume. I write a new resume for every single job I apply for, because usually every single job will have different skill sets and things like that. And thank God for computers, because we can more easily do that. So different job descriptions for every single job. Utilize those words. Especially some large companies, have computers that will now go through and they will sort out resumes and cover letters looking for those keywords. And if you do not have those keywords in your cover letter or resume, chances are your information will be put to the side. So you want to make sure that you use those keywords. Follow the rules. I can't articulate this enough. I see this happen all the time, where we have a deadline for applications and somebody's resume or something comes in afterwards. And I know that how that happens. You didn't come upon the information until the last minute. But I'm just telling you, as somebody who has conducted job searches, if your information comes in after the application, then we don't look at your application until we've gone through everybody else's. And if nothing else has surfaced, then we might start looking at those who came in late. If we ask for a cover letter, make sure you include a cover letter. If we say we want it on a Word document, we want it on a Word document, not a PDF, because a lot of times we're actually sending out that information to other individuals, and it just makes it a huge headache if we have to change it. What else? We want to make sure that if we say we want a writing sample, because sometimes people do still, we want to make sure you include that. So follow the rules. Somebody says, I see volunteer applications all the time. If you can't fill it out right, why bother filling out at all? Exactly. And also make sure, and Susan says, if it states cover letter optional, would you still send one? Yes, Susan, I would. I don't know why they would say cover letter optional, but the cover letter is really good because, and the cover letter doesn't have to be really, really huge. And the cover letter is one thing that you could copy and paste to some degree with you could use again and again. So for instance, cover letter, I may say at the very beginning, what kind of identify the job you're looking for, what the job title is or whatever, identify why you want the job. Then in the guts, say why you are the perfect person for the job. They don't have to look any further. You're the perfect person. And then obviously conclude it. The job cover letter, I'm not going to read a cover letter that goes on for 2 pages, because first of all, that tells me that you can't be concise. So that's one of the reasons you want to make a cover letter. So just keeping it maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 paragraphs, really quick. Just it's really basically supposed to say, I am the best person for this job, and this is why. And then the resume backs it up. Use the cover letter to explain CVA, Carol says. Yeah, include that, because a lot of times people are not going to understand what CVA is. And so that's something that you want to make sure that you include. And then finally, thank you letters. Yep, still need to do thank you letters. There's a lot of discussion as to whether thank you letters can be by email or if you still have to do a hard copy with a stamp, snail mail. Personally, folks, I really like a personal thank you letter. I like you to get out the good stationery and with your, in your best penmanship, write out a quick thank you note, stick a stamp on it and give them mail. I actually got a job once because they were so impressed by my thank you letter, not only what I wrote, but also how quickly the turnaround was, because I actually mailed it after the interview. I wrote it in the car and then I put it in the mailbox. So they got it almost the same day. It just showed a second effort type of thing that was really good. And one thing to think about in the thank you letters, a lot of times people are like, well, thank you for the interview. I don't know what else to say. One of the things I like to do is that after, you've all done this where you've had an interview and you've gotten back to the car and you're like, oh, darn it, I meant to say this. They asked me about this example and I totally forgot about this other example that would have been so much better. So write about it. So one of the things to do is you want to do a thank you. You'd write, thank you for taking the time to visit with me. I'm really, interested in this organization and being part of your organization. During the interview, you asked me specifically about an example of when my management style, something like that. And what I wanted to say, or what I should have said, or I could have also added, is this was the example. So actually, it gives you an opportunity to correct when you just had a brain freeze, you freaked out during the interview and you forgot something. And so it gives you an opportunity. Plus it gives you something to write around specifically. I like to respond. If you have multiple interviewers, I like to send a thank you note to each one of the interviewers. And I like to respond to one of the questions they asked me specifically to show that I was really paying attention to what they were asking me and who was asking that question. So somebody says, I do email, thanking them for the opportunity and my experience. And that's great. Like I said, there's a lot of discussion and different people, the expectations are different. Sometimes emails are the only way you have a conversation, especially with Zoom, these days. So I just wanted to give you those couple ideas. All right, moving on. I wanted to also spend some time talking about what does the board do anyway, about nonprofit boards. I spend most of my career, or most of my job right now, is going around talking to nonprofit boards, helping them to understand what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, different things like that. And what I find is that a lot of people who are in nonprofits don't know what the board does. A lot of times executive directors aren't quite sure what the board does. Certainly volunteer managers, a lot of times we don't know what the board does. And I think that you could be you'd be a much better volunteer manager. I think you'd be a much better staff person, certainly a better executive director, and even a better board person if you really understand what the board does. So I have something I'm going to go over really quickly, which is called kind of like the top 10 things every board should know but doesn't. Again, there's going to be a lot of these slides that are hidden. So I'm just going to touch on some of this. But if you have any questions about anything that I'm talking about afterwards, then feel free to shoot me an email about this. Okay. Okay. So first question is, this is kind of something you can say in the chat. If your organization were a body, what would the board be? Would the board be the hands? And just to be sure I mentioned this, at some point in time, the board is all of these body parts, okay? At some point in time. But let's say in the utopia, in the perfect scenario, if your organization were a body, what part of the body would the board be? I see some people are already putting the head. I said the brains. The brains are an option. The spine. Yeah, I need to add the spine. Thank you, Dorian. I keep forgetting to add the spine. The legs, the heart, or the guts. So some of you are already answering in the chat. Thank you very much. So if your organization were a body, what part of the body would the board be? And what is the best answer? The neck. Somebody said, Carol said the neck. Go ahead and use the chat right now, everybody. Brain, the eyes. Eyes are good. The legs, the brain, the heart, brain. So again, there are a lot of instances where your board may be different things. Maybe the board is the one that's moving forward, moving the organization forward. So you said, oh, it should be the legs. Somebody just said the mouth. Absolutely. Let me suggest to you that what I would think is the best answer, or the answer I think is the best, is the heart. Your organization, your board is the heart. And the reason why we say that is because, okay, I don't have a medical degree, but as I understand medicine, God forbid, somebody could be in an accident and they could be, quote, brain dead, where the brain wasn't working, or their hands aren't working, or other parts of their body aren't working, but the heart is still working. And the heart is pumping blood through the circulatory system to the other parts of the body and keeping the body alive. And so for that reason is why I say or suggest to you that if your organization were a body, the board is the heart of the organization. It is what keeps the organ thriving. If you don't have a heart, if your heart's not beating, and if your heart's not, you're not here, you're not with us anymore. So that's one of the things to think about. So helping the board to understand their role. Yes, they need to be the hands and the guts and the brains at some different times. Absolutely, you're right. But really, the board is the heart of the organization. Okay, that you did that question. So I want to also talk about terminology a little bit, because there's a lot of different words that people use for different staff position or different places within an organization. And there is no laws that say that the person who runs the organization, it needs to be called the executive director or whatever. I mean, there's nothing that says that specifically. So you may come across a lot of different types of titles, and I wanted to kind of go over this a little bit. So for instance, the executive director is the person who is usually a hired professional who leads the staff and reports to the board. Now, sometimes you might have an all volunteer organization. Many of you may have that scenario. And so therefore, one of the board people have to take the position of an executive director. But let's say we have a large nonprofit and we have a hired staff. So the executive director, now sometimes that person's called the CEO, sometimes that person's called the president. Again, there's a lot of different words, and it can be very, very confusing for people, especially if different organizations use different words. But I wanted to kind of give you an idea that usually when we're talking about an executive director, it's the hired professional who leads the staff and reports to the board. The president is also known as the board chair often. Again, like I said, sometimes that executive director, I had a boss once who was executive director of our nonprofit, but he preferred the term CEO/president. So sometimes the person wants to be called that, and that happens. But most of the time, when you're referring to the president, it's also they're known as the board chair. Governance. A lot of times people are like, well, what's the governance board? The governance board is the board of directors, the group of the board of directors. Now, you usually in a nonprofit organization only have one governance. Now, sometimes there's advisory boards, there's sometimes boards that confuse the whole thing, but usually you only have one group that is in charge of governance, and that's your board of directors. And then executive committee or executive council, or sometimes called are specifically the board officers. That's another term you may hear. And then executive session, you may hear about. Executive session is when the board meets without the staff. That includes the executive director. So just so you know, that's what they mean by executive session. Sometimes the board will say, we're going into executive session. And that strikes terror in every executive director. So just so you know, those are just some terminology, words that you may hear that maybe you just weren't quite sure about why that is. And when we talk about what do we mean by the board? When we talk about the board, we mean the body, everybody. If you have 3 board members, if you have 5, if you have 12, if you have 75, yes, I've served on boards that had 75 board members. When we talk about the board, we're talking about the entire group. So we'll say the board decided this, or the board did this, or this is the ruling of the board. That means everybody together. I know, I understand every single person is unique. You're all special. You're all your own person, own little snowflake. And I don't know how you want to think about this for yourself. Some people I've talked to say, well, I kind of think of it as some kind of monster with 12 different heads, or I utilize some religious connotation or something. I don't care how you're going to think about it. But when we refer to the board, we're talking about everybody as a group, the one board. So that's why, and it's really important because the board speaks with one voice, not individually. When we're talking about nonprofit executive directors, I have met many, many different types of executive directors, and some of them are articulated here. Sometimes the executive director is the dictator, and a lot of times these are executive directors who have been in their position for a number of years, like 20 or 30 or 40 years or something like that. And they basically, everybody wants to do whatever they say, kind of thing. A lot of times I've met executive directors who come out more as a servant. I've seen executive directors who are like a guru or a visionary. Sometimes executive directors are kind of like Yoda. They're all seeing, all knowing. And other times I've seen executive directors who look more as like an administrative assistant. Maybe they don't look like that to you within the offices, but way they relate to the board a lot of times is as an assistant. In fact, I've seen executive directors who were delivering pizza to the board. I mean, it's really nice to provide food for the board, but hopefully your executive director is doing some other things besides worrying about what kind of topping the board wants on their pizzas. So these are some things to think about, because the relationship between the nonprofit, the executive director, and the board is really a partnership, and it's very, very complicated because in most of the cases in a relationship, there isn't one entity who can fire the other entity, but that's what you have in this scenario. The board is responsible for hiring and, unfortunately, if necessary, firing the executive director, but yet they should be in partnership. They should be working together. So that's why this relationship can be very, very confusing. let's do a real quick thing. I have a real quick quiz that we can use. And again, we can use the chat for it. It's called Whose Job Is It Anyway? And your options are, your answers are the board or the executive director. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions, about 6 questions, and you need to respond in the chat if it's the board's responsibility or the executive director's responsibility. And those are your only 2 options, the board or executive director. Okay, ready? This one's kind of fun because a lot of times I find I do this with boards and they get these answers wrong and they're really, really surprised. So governance, this is a responsibility of the board, right? So who is ultimately responsible for developing and implementing the organization's strategic plan? So in the chat, respond either the board or the executive director. Who is ultimately responsible for developing and implementing the strategic plan? I see a lot of different answers. I see Susan said executive director and board, and yes, you should be working together on it. Dorian says implementing. The correct answer is the board. The board is ultimately responsible for developing and implementing the strategic plan. And I know that's probably not what is happening in your organization. A lot of you probably have a board that goes off into a meeting and develops this wonderful strategic plan and kind of hands it down, just like, you know, God handing Moses the 10 commandments or something and said, make it so type of thing. No, the board is ultimately responsible for implementing the strategic plan. Now, the way this is supposed to work is the board develops a strategic plan with goals and different things like that. And then the board identifies what they're going to be doing to ensure that the strategic plan goals are met. And then likewise, a lot of times the executive director will take that strategic plan and base the goals for the staff on that strategic plan. So that's kind of how that works. But ultimately, when you look at it from a nonprofit management standpoint, the board is responsible for ensuring that the strategic plan is implemented. Okay, see why I told you it's kind of surprising? Next one, fiduciary responsibility. Most of you probably are aware that it is required that a nonprofit organization submit a 990 every single year. Who ultimately is responsible for ensuring that that 990 gets submitted to the Internal Revenue Service on time? The board or the executive director? See, again, mix of different answers. Ding, 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 ding. Well, the correct answer is the board. It is the board's responsibility, even if I understand, again, with many of your organizations, the executive director is the one who actually does it, or maybe they have an auditor who does it and the executive director makes sure the auditor does it. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the board to ensure that the 990 is completed and sent into the IRS in a timely basis or on time. In fact, I have seen situations where the nonprofit organization wasn't assessed a fee for turning the information in late, and the board, individual board members had to pay that penalty. It did not come out of the organization's budget. It came out specifically out of the individual board people's budget. So there. And I see somebody saying something about Canada. I'm sorry, I may be wrong. I may not know about Canada. We can talk about that in the question and answer session in a little bit. Board management. Who is responsible for taking the minutes of your board meetings and also archiving them and having them readily accessible? The board or the executive director? I said, you can't say board secretary. It's either the board or the executive director. Ding, 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 ding. The correct answer is the board. they are the board minutes. The board therefore is responsible for taking the minutes from the board meetings. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this right today, but I'd be happy to visit with you, because if you are working with a nonprofit where the executive director or one of the staff are taking those minutes, we need to talk, because that is a potential fraudulent situation, and it can be challenging. And I understand getting board members to take minutes is like pulling teeth. It's really, really hard. I get that, but it is ultimately the board's responsibility for taking the minutes and compiling the minutes for the organization. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the secretary. It could be somebody else on the board as well. So just FYI. Board recruitment, who's responsible for recruiting new board members, the board or the executive director? I'm seeing a lot of board answers. I think you're starting to see the way this works. Correct. The correct answer is the board. I don't know about you, but I haven't been in many positions where I get to hire my boss, and that would be what you would be doing if you are executive director. Now, I've seen where executive directors, may identify people, potential board members. They may say, oh, this person has been really, really helpful on committees and is doing some great work and is really supportive of our organization. They may make a great board member, and they may suggest that person to the board, but ultimately it is the board's responsibility to recruit the new board members. And then financial sustainability and advocacy. Who is responsible for ensuring that your organization has enough funds to keep the doors open? The board or executive director? Who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that your organization has enough funding to keep the doors open? Many of you are saying board. I don't know if this is, I think you're, responding to this one, right? The board. The board is responsible, because the board is the one who has to actually make the decision if you have to change services, change your mission, or close the doors. That is the board's decision. So it is the board's responsibility. And finally, Gerald says, interesting how work experiences haven't always followed these rules. Right. This is what keeps me busy. This is what I spend a lot of time doing, is going around talking to nonprofits and opening the eyes of board members, because what I find is that a board doesn't know what they should be doing. A lot of times is when they get into trouble for doing things they shouldn't be doing. So that's why we try to clear this up. And finally, evaluation. Who is responsible for conducting an evaluation of the board? You thought I was going to say executive directors, right? Who's responsible for conducting an evaluation of the board? Applied agency. Yeah. The board. The board should do an evaluation of itself. Of course, it should evaluate the executive director. You should evaluate the board as itself. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but the board should also have something that's called a commitment letter, so the board chair can evaluate each individual board member every single year. So that's part of it too. All right. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for playing along with me. I hope that you learned something, and that was something that you appreciate. But I just find that it's so important for people to really understand what the responsibilities of the board are, as well as the executive director, and how that can sometimes get out of whack. The next thing I want to do is, like I said, we're going to do this very, very quickly, go through what I call the top 10 things every board member should know. And again, there are a lot more slides that are hidden on this slide deck than I'm including here, just from the instance of time, because we only have about 30 minutes right now. So first thing that every board member should understand is that board service is a job. I'm not suggesting that it's a full-time job, but some days it would be a part-time job. There is a lot more to being on a nonprofit board. This is not your father's nonprofit board. One of the things I tell board members all the time is chances are previous nonprofit boards on which you've served have been ineffective. I'm not saying bad, but ineffective. A lot of times people will think that the larger or more prosperous a board you're on, the better board person you are. Like if you are with, say, like United Way of our community or something, a lot of times people will say, well, we want that person to come to be on our board because they were with United Way, so they know what they're doing. Not necessarily the case. I'm not going to talk about your specific United Way, but I've worked with a lot of United Ways and Salvation Armies and SPCAs and a lot of different organizations like that. And a lot of times they're just as dysfunctional as other organizations and smaller entities. So just because somebody has experience being on a board, their experiences may not be actually accurate. They may come to your board with misconceptions or misperceptions, some of which we just talked about. So, so you need to understand that sometimes I think the best board people are people who are rookies, who've never been on a board before and are ready to learn what it takes to be on the board. If you think that being on a board means just attending board meetings, you're wrong. It should mean a lot of other things. It's really great to encourage board members to volunteer. In fact, I know many organizations that specifically as part of their commitment letter requires a board member to volunteer. And some of you may have that specific situation in your organization where board members are volunteering, not just on committees, but actually to do the work of the organization. So that's really helpful. Board members should be on committees. Board members should be advocating. There's a lot of other things that board members should be doing than just attending board meetings. I tell them they should consider this a new part-time job. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to mean 40 hours a week or 20 hours a week, but you know what? There are weeks when I'm on the boards of some organizations that I actually am doing 20 hours of work a week. It's just different times a year. It should require 100% commitment from 100% of the board membership, 100% of the time. And I really emphasize this. Too often you might have a board that has, let's say your board has 12 people, three of whom are really active and engaged and doing all the work and just basically carrying the load for the rest of the organization, the rest of the board. And that's not fair. I believe 100% of the board. Now, different board members could be doing different tasks and doing different, because they have different skill sets, that's fine. And yes, life does get in the way. If you are somebody if you have a board person who's going through a health crisis or a job situation or something like that, I'm not saying we're unkind or inhuman, but for most part, we should expect everybody to be towing the line. And if you have board members who are just what I call coasters, just, scooting by and coming to board meetings, but really aren't engaged in any other way, we should find another place for them because they are not really actively engaged with our organization. You should consider it an honor, a privilege, and a duty to serve on the board. And last but not least, a lot of times we say, if you've seen one nonprofit board, you've seen one nonprofit board, because every single board that I have worked with is different with their own inconsistencies, idiosyncrasies, different things like that. So just because somebody was on one board doesn't mean that they're going to know everything there is to do on the next board. Number two, the second thing every board member should know is what I call stay in your lane. And this is probably one of the things that keeps me the most busy as a nonprofit board consultant. Too often, as I said, if a board doesn't know what they should be doing, they often get into areas that they should not be doing. And this is pretty down and dirty explanation of the roles and responsibilities. So this is your org chart, for instance, and see you have the nonprofit at the top. You have your board chair right here, your executive director, and then your executive director is responsible for the staff and the volunteers. Now, I understand that you as volunteer manager might be between the executive director and the volunteers, and there may be other people. So this is a very simplistic chart. I haven't included everybody, but basically the executive director is responsible for the staff and the volunteers. The board chair is responsible for the board members and any committees. So for instance, if there was a situation where one of the board members, I've seen this happen, where one of the board members didn't like something the staff was doing. They said, oh, that person shouldn't be doing that. They're not doing their job, whatever. It is inappropriate for that board person to go to the executive director or to go to the staff with their complaint. When you get into the chain of command, which some of you may know from military, the chain of command is if a board member has an issue, concern, challenge, something with something that's being done on this side, they go to the board chair. The board chair then addresses it with the executive director, and the executive director addresses it with the staff. That's the way the chain of command goes. Likewise, and I've seen this situation actually happen where a staff didn't like something the executive director was doing, their management style. Now, if the executive director is doing something that is immoral, unethical, illegal, then in those situations, it may be appropriate for the staff to bring it to the attention of the board chair. But if the staff just doesn't like the way the executive director is managing them, or they're taking too much vacation or something like that, it is inappropriate for the staff to go to the board chair or the board members. And I know that that is challenging for a lot of organizations, a lot of people, but that's really the way nonprofits work. So the board chair, as it says, acts as a liaison between the executive director and the board members, as well as individual board members. The executive director acts as a liaison between the board chair and the staff and handles day-to-day operations. And board members work as a team to support the mission of the organization and create the vision for organization's future. I have been a staff person at nonprofit organizations where as a staff person, I was not allowed to talk to the board. And I'm not saying that's a positive experience, but I'm saying that, in fact, somebody asked me on another call, they said, well, why would a executive director do that? And I would say that that executive director is lacking confidence in their abilities, basically. But so obviously board and staff probably talk to each other, especially if they're on committees together. But in the event that there is some kind of discussion, challenge, problem between a staff member and a board member, then the staff person goes to the executive director goes to board chair goes to board members. Okay. So somebody, Karen just said about responsible for providing volunteer opportunities and tracking board hours. And in the past, I've been told not to bug the board. I know, I'm sorry, Karen, that happens a lot. And just so you know, Karen, I think I'm going to bring this up later, but just as a reminder is that your board members are volunteers. So I hope that that they have to fulfill all the same applications and background checks and everything that every other volunteer has to do. And I will tell you that I've worked with organizations where the board didn't have to do those things. And then when they started making the board do those things like application, background checks, it really changed the way the board related to the staff and the executive director and everybody. So it's really helpful. Folks, as a volunteer manager, I know it's an upward battle because a lot of times executive director doesn't want you to do that. But if you can, it really can actually help the entire process, and it makes the board more equitable to the staff. In terms of the job duties, the board, and you notice that there's overlap in this in some degrees because both entities should be advocating within the community. But the board, I like to think of they're the ones who think to the future, they're visionaries. They set the budget. Interesting thing is the board sets the budget and they set the salary for the executive director, but technically the board should not be setting the salary for any other position. They basically give the executive director a certain amount of funding to use towards salaries, and then the executive director can decide, what the salary scale is for different entities or different people within the organization. And the executive director is more the boots on the ground. So boots on the ground, day-to-day obligations are the purview, excuse me, of the executive director, and the board should be thinking future, futuristic, visionary, that kind of thing. What we're going to be doing the next 5-10 years, that kind of thing. And I'm doing this very, very quickly because this is not the whole reason you came here, I know, but I'm hoping that you find that this is helpful. It's a very complicated relationship, obviously. So a couple other things we should know about. Number 3, every board member should know that board orientation should be required for all board members every year, because and this is a list of some of the things that should be covered in the board orientation, because, and I say every single year rather than just when you're a new board member, is because last year you may have been a new board member and this year you may be a committee chair. And so the orientation could provide information that you didn't really pay attention to last year in the orientation. But this is something you should be done for board, every single board. And a lot of these things you may know about. It's fairly obvious that be included on the orientation. But the one thing I really want to highlight is connections and networks. What board members need to know is that one of the biggest assets they bring to the organization are their connections and networks, that the staff can go to the board and say, do you know somebody who does this? We're looking for somebody who has this experience, or something like that. That's one of the best things that a board can bring to the organization. In terms of governance, a couple things you may not be clear about is, as I said, the board has ultimate responsibility for effective and efficient governance of the organization. And then obviously you have some bylaws that were developed. Hopefully these bylaws are fairly general and not too specific, because otherwise you have, every time you want to make a change to those bylaws, it takes either 2/3 or 3/4, whatever your bylaws say, vote of the board to make a change. So I think of the bylaws as kind of like the 10 commandments. They're set in stone, and to make any changes to it would take a lot of effort. Meanwhile, your organization should have some board operational policies and procedures that I think of as the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, where they're more fluid, they can be changed, more easily adapted, that kind of thing. So a good example I say is that if your organization requires that a board meets so many times a year, then that can be very general in the bylaws that you're going to meet 4 times a year or something like that. And then it could be more specific as to when you meet in the policies and procedures. Mission and purpose just is the board's responsibility to make sure that the organization's fulfilling its mission and its purpose. And just so you know, if you've heard these two terms and you're not quite sure what I mean by that, the mission is basically articulates what your organization or why your organization exists. And vision is what the world would look like if you were to complete your mission. I just noticed what time it is, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But again, all of this information is in your is on the slides. Every board member should know that board members can be personally responsible for mismanagement. And I've seen this happen where board members have to actually write out a personal check. Usually when you have an executive director who's providing some documentations or treasurer's report for the board, these are some of the things that should be included in those financials: balance sheet, income sheet. All these things should be included in the financial disclosures that the board gets, and they should get it at every single board meeting. I've also included some policy musts that every single organization should have. Every board member should know that board management is the responsibility of the board managers. I talked about minutes earlier, and one of the things that's very important is that minutes be taken by the board. We talked about that a little bit in the question and answer session. This organizational dashboard is something that I developed. Is basically a really good cheat sheet for the executive director, or what should be included in executive director's report, like staff and board updates, program updates, funding updates. If you're an executive director, these are some of the things that you should be providing to your board on at every meeting, giving them an update of what's going on within your organization. Number 6 is don't ask your friends to join the board. The only reason I say that is because too often, if the board members are just friends of friends, then you really do not impact the rest of the community. There are things we can teach boards about board matrices and developing and going out and really ensuring that you have a diverse board. So making sure that you have people from all different walks of life, all areas of your community, and with different skill sets too. So it's all about getting a diverse board. And by diverse board, we do not necessarily just mean by race, although that is something obviously we want to include, but it's also gender, and it's by age, and it's by skill set, and by education, different things like that. You don't have to be a board member to be involved. There are definitely committees and things like that. One of the great things is to utilize people on committees who are not on the board that have specific skill sets. And then once they've done a great job on the committee, then they can graduate to being on the board. So committees are actually a great way of recruiting future board members. In terms of fundraising and advocacy are part of the job. It is essential that every board member participate in advocacy and in fundraising efforts. These are some basic statistics about nonprofit budgets and fundraising. A lot of people don't realize is that the most effective and greatest success in fundraising is individual contributions. As we all know, special events take a whole lot of time, and a lot of time do not, if you take into consideration the amount of volunteer time and staff time, they a lot of times do not make money. And so one of the things we like our board members to understand is that individual contributions are usually our greatest success. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have other ways of getting funding for our organization, but something that board members a lot of times need to know. And then advocating every single day for your organization. I like to tell board members it's their responsibility to ensure that every single person in your community knows why your community would be devastated if your organization did not exist. And if your board members are able to articulate that in a compelling and effective way, funding will come in and volunteers will come in, right? Because it's all about growing the number of people in your community who know about your organization and know not only the name of the organization, but really what impact you're having on your community. Annual evaluation should be conducted for everyone. And then this is a little bit about the executive director evaluation, and you should continually ensure that your board members are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And finally, number 10 is attributes of effective nonprofit board member. And just a list of some of the things we've talked about today. And I'm so sorry that I've taken more time than I intended. I recognize that I'm going kind of fast through this information. But as they've indicated, we can continue the conversation offline if you have some questions. I just wanted to include a little bit more about being a volunteer manager is that you can utilize, like we talked about, is utilizing the content we've discussed to change your job description, position yourself for a salary increase, continue your education in nonprofit management. Like we said before, using the value of the volunteer hour to show what your office brings into the organization. Never use the word just, they're never just volunteers or just a volunteer management. And lastly, making sure that if you're looking for what compelling ways to showcase what you're doing, look at what human resources department in your organization is doing. Making sure one of the things I think is most effective is training all your staff in volunteer management. Like I said, board members too. and getting your CVA. That's one of the best ideas, best ways that you can really develop a compelling argument for what you are bringing to the organization and what you could bring to other organizations as well. So hopefully I've seen a few comments in here, what we've learned. Coursework, I didn't leave enough time to go over this. I apologize, but if you'd like to visit with me offline with this, I would be happy to do that. I'm sorry. This is usually a problem for me, is that I know I have too much content for the amount of time that's allotted. And I provide some nonprofit resources here at the end that you may want to follow up on. Again, any questions? I'm going to turn it's 12:30 right now. I'm turning over to Kathy and Gretchen to see, I know they have some comments.
Hi, thank you. Gosh, thank you so much, Mary Beth. This was really informative, eye-opening, and you just gave us so much practical knowledge and information. I think understanding how your board runs and how they're all different. And if you can go to the board meetings, you should go to the board meetings and participate or listen, because I think it's really eye-opening and encouraging to see how your board operates. I know we're really at the end of our time. And I wanted to say that you could if you're still here, you can put a few questions in the chat and we can get to them. But we have a new benefit where we are going to continue the conversation with Mary Beth at our members only LinkedIn group page. And Nicole Smith has put the link in our chat. So if you go to that link, ask to join, and then you can put your questions in there and Mary Beth will continue answering those questions for you. Just a couple other things. Our next speaker is on February 25th, Dana Litwin, and she's presenting Sticky Situations, Marketing and Media Magic for Volunteer Engagement. There's always lots of opportunities to volunteer with Alive. Membership, marketing, and our programs and advocacy are looking for more volunteers. So you can reach out to Volunteer Alive to look at those. And that just so you know that we are also looking for peers and other Alive members to consider doing a presentation for our academy. If you have something you want to share and know something about, let us know, and we'd love to talk to you about that opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and just double check and chat, Mary Beth, and just see if we have any further questions.
Sure, I'm happy to stay on the line if anybody wants to hang out. I understand if somebody has to run to the next appointment or something, but I'm happy to stick around if there's any questions.
Thank you. And just again, this is recorded. It will be put on the Alive members side page about Friday, and participants will receive the slides as well. So thank you, everyone. And if you can stay, and we'll go ahead and take any questions. All right. Thanks, Mary Beth.
There's one question, it looks like in the Q&A. Somebody said,
look at that.
Somebody, can you remind us how to save the chat? If you go into the chat at the very bottom on the right side, you'll see there's a smiley face. Next to that, if you click on those three dots, it should say more, and it should come up and say save the chat. And if you do that, it'll automatically save it. Now you're going to have to try to find it in your computer, but that usually is the way that is done.
Mary Beth, there was a question that I had was asked, and then I said we'd answer it live. And it's from Alicia, and it says, in our onboarding materials for new board members, we do have roles and responsibilities of board and staff, but there's a lot of unclarity about the relationship looks like when staff and board serve on committees together. Do you have any sample language that other orgs have used in their onboarding materials to better outline what that relationship looks like? I always like to say, think about Star Trek and the Prime Directive.
I like that. And I will use that. Absolutely. 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 Yeah. And in fact, one of the things I like to make sure that a lot of times people say, well, my committee isn't doing anything. They don't know what to do. And I say to them, what have you asked them to do? So one of the things I like to do is when you develop that strategic plan, have a committee, like maybe it's your marketing committee, look at the strategic plan on the goals and then identify what they are going to accomplish to move the organization closer to those goals. So in essence, you have the board working on the goals, but they're working on what aspects that they should be doing, staff working on the goals and aspects of what they should be doing, and then committees, individual committees working towards the same goals as everybody else, but utilizing their specific skills and their areas of expertise. I hope that clears it up a little bit. Other questions?
Just should say Faiza has never watched Star Trek. I'm kind of in shock, but no judgment.
Not at all. There are two more that FISA has also put in the questions that are still open. Is there a body that oversees boards in general? For example, if a board is neglecting their responsibilities, who can the ED or staff turn to?
That's a really, really good question. There is not a body that oversees the boards, but I would suggest that you contact BoardSource. They're at boardsource.org. They are a nonprofit organization that supports boards and nonprofit development, and they would probably be able to provide some guidance on how to go about that. Ultimately, the other body that you would be contacting would be your state Secretary of State's office, because that's the entity that oversees nonprofits. And if your board isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can do that. Now, I can tell you that in Texas, we had a nonprofit fraud hotline. That was another aspect, but a lot of states do not have that. Otherwise, one of the things that happens is when the executive director is upset because the board is not doing what they should be doing, they often call a nonprofit consultant like myself to come in as an objective observer to provide information to the board and sort of a wake-up call. And I'm not here to suggest me, but just sometimes it's good to have an outside entity come in and provide some board training. And that's a lot of times when the board becomes more aware of what they should be doing. What would Jean-Luc do? Somebody said. Other comments? Questions? Thank you. I'm going to review the chat afterwards. And so if there's any comments or things like that, again, you can always follow up with me if there's any anything that you think of after the fact that I should have included. And thank you for your time and patience with this.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. It was great to have you. Do you want to go to that last slide and we can just follow up?
That's why I was trying to do that. There we go. There we go.
There we go. So just thank you to everyone for attending. Mary Beth, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It was great to connect with you again. And
Yes.
everyone, just thank you for the work that you do in your communities. And Kathy, I will let you finish up and we will be done.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I hope to see you in February, also with Dana and her presentation. Take care, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. I'm going to stick around in case you guys have any comments after everybody. Oh, it looks like it's just us now. Maybe.
I think Gretchen, hold on. Let me get back. I'm turning video on, turning it off. Okay, there we go.